the first night on Oak Street. I woke to a shimmer breathing across my lawn, an unnatural pulse that rippled like heat without warmth. It wasn't headlights, and it wasn't the moon. The glow lay close to the grass and throbbed in a slow, mechanical rhythm, as if the ground itself were signaling. I had moved back into my parents' old house 3 days earlier with a simple plan: fix the gutters, mow the yard, and keep my head down long enough to show the HOA I wasn't a problem. At 8:57 p.m., before the boxes were even empty, 2 board members came with clipboards and a metal measuring stick, pacing my front yard like investigators at a scene. Under the porch light, they handed me a notice of violation mailbox color out of compliance, lawn height borderline, and an unapproved exterior modification for a temporary motion light I hadn't even plugged in yet. 14 days to cure, hearing to follow if I failed. Annoyance would have been manageable. The light was not. When the inspectors left, I threw the main breaker to test my wiring. The refrigerator sighed to a stop. The house exhaled, and every clock blinked out. Yet beyond the window the glow remained, pooling along the walkway, independent of anything I controlled. I stepped onto the porch. The air bit colder than the season allowed, a pocket of midnight chill that smelled faintly of old chlorine, like the locker rooms at the base pool where I used to run drills. Training told me to observe before reacting. I crouched and watched. The light had no visible source, no bulb, no beam, just a milk-white film quivering above the concrete. It pulsed at 01:11 a.m., steady as a metronome. Across the street, a blind snapped shut. Someone else had seen it and chosen silence. That silence pressed against my ribs worse than the cold. I took the steps down, boots scraping gravel, and circled the front walk. At the edge of the property line, the glow thinned into a narrow stream and bled past my mailbox toward the neighbors on either side, as if the street itself were a circuit and my lawn a resistor. I reached out with a gloved hand. The light recoiled, not like a flame, but like a startled animal. My breath fogged and disappeared into it. Inside. I steadied my hands and opened a green notebook. Time, weather, exact location, duration. The routine helped. After deployments, I learned that writing could nail the world in place when it wanted to slide. I wasn't here to fight anyone. I was here for quiet, to make the house livable, to prove I could stop reacting to every flicker. Then the flicker reacted to me. The glow gathered from the yard and crept up the porch steps in a smooth, private tide. It slid across the threshold like water climbing glass and pooled thinly along the bottom seam of my front door. A line of light, no wider than a shoelace, traced the grain of the wood and held there, humming just inside my hearing. On the other side, I felt rather than heard a pressure, a gentle test, the way a stranger might press a palm to a window to see if anyone was home. I set the notebook down and reached for the deadbolt. The light moved first. The band of light at my door dissolved before I could reach the lock, sliding back into the night like it had never been there. But the imprint remained, an afterglow seared into my vision and into my nerves. I didn't sleep again. By morning, I had the notebook open on the kitchen table, sketching the exact pattern of the glow across the lawn, careful as if I were diagramming a battlefield. The discipline calmed me, but not enough to drown the unease that came with daylight. At 9:00 sharp, a white envelope was taped to my front door. The HOA seal in bold navy ink stared back at me. Second notice, exterior nuisance, unauthorized lighting. They claimed I was violating Section 4.2 of the covenants, which prohibited installation of exterior lights visible to neighboring properties without prior approval. The attached photo showed my house from across the street except in the shot. The glow spilled from my lawn exactly as I'd seen it. The timestamp matched the hour I'd logged. Only the photo didn't show an origin. No lamp, no fixture, just light itself. The note warned 14 days to correct. Failure to comply will result in a hearing before the board and escalating fines. I called the number at the bottom. No answer, just voicemail. By afternoon, I was cutting grass trying to keep my mind steady. Cynthia. The woman 2 doors down, the one I remembered as a child who always complained about where kids left their bikes, walked over with her tiny dog tucked under one arm. She didn't ask about the move, didn't say hello. She leaned against my fence and whispered loud enough for the other neighbors working in their yards to hear. "People say you brought something back with you," she said. "All that equipment from your tours, signals, jammers. Who knows? Maybe that's what's bleeding through the ground." Her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of planting poison. I wanted to correct her, to tell her I had nothing left from Iraq but a few medals in a box. Instead, I just tightened my jaw and went back to mowing. The dog barked twice, sharp and frantic, staring not at me but at the front walk where the glow had pooled last night. Cynthia pulled it close, muttered, and stormed off. That evening, I set up an old infrared camera from my storage trunk. The device wasn't much grainy resolution, black and white, but it was steady, dependable. I aimed it toward the street, aligned the timestamp, and waited. At 01:11 am, the light returned. This time it didn't just hover. Through the camera's eye, the glow stretched tall, resolving into the faint outline of a figure, shoulders, head, the suggestion of arms moving as if swimming in air. The shape glided across the lawn and vanished into the neighbor's hedge. I froze, the hair on my arms prickling. It wasn't reflection, wasn't lens flare. It was form. I printed the still frame. Black sky, white shape, empty street. And in the corner of the shot, a window across the street, blinds half open. Someone else had been watching. I didn't wait until morning. With the still frame clutched in my hand, I crossed the living room and pinned it to the corkboard I had started on the far wall. 3 notes already hung there: the HOA violation slip, my sketch diagram of the light, and my handwritten log. Now the photograph joined them, evidence in black and white. Each piece felt like a nail driven into the same coffin, but I didn't yet know whose. At 7 a.m., another knock rattled the door. I half expected Cynthia again, eager to spread fresh gossip. Instead, it was a man in a polo with the HOA crest, a clipboard balanced on his arm. He introduced himself as Andrew from Compliance. No smile, no warmth. He handed me a carbon copy form, noting an escalated violation and informing me that the HOA board had scheduled a hearing in 2 weeks' time. His eyes lingered on the photo behind me. "You'll want to take that down," he said quietly, pointing with his chin. "The board doesn't appreciate residents fabricating evidence." Fabricating. My voice tightened. "That's time-stamped. You can check." He just clicked his pen, made a final note, and walked back to his car without another word. That afternoon, I visited the county recorder's office, a square brick building that smelled of dust and damp paper. I asked for parcel files for Oak Street, focusing on my lot and the adjacent common areas. The clerk disappeared into the stacks and returned with a thin folder. Pages were missing, yanked out clean, leaving only torn stubs. When I asked about the gaps, the clerk shrugged. "Litigation hold," she said. "Some records from the 80s are sealed pending prior disputes. HOA business. I think." Still, in the back corner of the file, I found a faded plat map stamped 1983, a faint rectangle marked Parcel 17B, Memorial Garden. The area overlapped almost exactly where the HOA clubhouse stood today. I copied the page, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and tucked it into my notebook. The pieces were beginning to align into something far older than me, something the HOA had every reason to bury. That night, I prepared differently. Breaker off, camera armed, notebook ready, at 01:10 a.m. The glow sparked again, but this time, instead of hovering by the lawn, it stretched across the street toward my window. The camera caught it clearly, an elongated handprint of light pressed against the glass, 5 streaks burning white before sliding away. The pressure against the pane rattled the frame. For a heartbeat. I thought the glass might crack. I knew then this wasn't just nuisance or rumor. It was deliberate. It was choosing me. The HOA didn't waste time. By the second week, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox stamped hearing notice. It detailed fines escalating by the day, all linked to the so-called unapproved lighting installation on my property. The irony burned I had never installed a single bulb outside. The glow wasn't mine, but the board was determined to brand it as my violation. Word spread faster than the fines. On Oak Street, whispers traveled quicker than wind. I overheard Cynthia telling a pair of neighbors that my army equipment was leaking radiation through the soil. She even gestured toward the camera mounted on my porch as if it were proof of guilt. Each story twisted further from truth by midday. I heard someone mutter that I was experimenting with classified weapons. Their eyes carried a mix of suspicion and fear, and none of them asked me directly. They just avoided my yard as if stepping too close might stain them with whatever force had chosen me. That night I stood on the porch with coffee, staring at the dark hedge where the figure had vanished days earlier. I wanted logic to explain it. I wanted a transformer, a gas leak, anything tangible. But the silence stretched long, broken only by the shuffle of Cynthia's dog, whining as it pulled away from my lawn. Then came the second phenomenon. At exactly 01:11 the glow rose again, but this time the air vibrated. It wasn't loud, just a faint frequency crawling under the skin, a pressure that tightened my eardrums. The notebook on my table slid an inch across the surface as if nudged by static. The camera caught it all the figure again, taller this time, lingering longer. Through the lens, I could see a faint suggestion of eyes' white pits nested in the haze. I replayed the recording until dawn. Each frame confirmed what my senses had begged me to ignore. This was no trick of faulty wiring, no prank by restless teens. The shape was real, and someone else knew it. The window across the street, the same half-open blind, shifted in the footage, just slightly, as if a hand had brushed it aside to watch. By morning, another HOA notice appeared, taped at an angle to my front door. No envelope this time, just bold words across the top, "Final warning." The penalty fees were already listed in red ink. The message was clear. The board wasn't asking me to comply, they were telling me to surrender. The final warning still clung to my door when I drove to the HOA office the next morning. The building, a low brick structure with spotless windows, stood at the center of Oak Street like a courthouse for petty crimes. Inside, the air smelled of toner and lemon disinfectant. Framed photographs of community barbecues and pool parties lined the walls, images of harmony staged to mask the quiet hostility that ruled here. Behind the reception desk sat Marjorie Clark, the HOA president herself, 62, perfectly pressed blazer, hair arranged in a shell of silver curls. She didn't look up from her paperwork until I placed the notice squarely on the counter between us. "This isn't mine," I said. "Whatever that light is, it doesn't come from me. Your own photograph shows it without a source." Her eyes flicked to the paper, then to me, cold and unimpressed. "Mr. Miller, the board has reviewed complaints from multiple residents. Your property is the common denominator. Whether you installed equipment or allowed interference to continue, you are responsible. I turned off my entire breaker. The light stayed. She smiled thinly. Then perhaps you need an electrician more competent than yourself. But do not drag this association into your theories. Gaslighting at its finest. She signed the form with a pen that gleamed like a weapon. Failure to remedy will lead to fines and possible liens against your property. Consider this friendly advice. Compliance is cheaper than resistance. I wanted to argue, to demand transparency about the missing records I'd glimpsed at the county office. But before I could speak, she leaned closer. Her voice dropped into a whisper that felt rehearsed. People here cherish peace, Mr. Miller. Stories about ghosts and lights disturb the market. Keep your tales to yourself, or you'll find more than fees waiting at your door. I left with my fists clenched and a taste of iron in my mouth. That night, I set the infrared camera again, determined to capture more. At 01:11 a.m., the glow erupted stronger than ever. This time it split into two streams, one curling toward my hedges, the other sliding up the siding of my house. The camera whined as static bled across the feed, the figure elongating into something skeletal. When I froze the frame, the outline revealed more than shoulders. It showed the bent form of a child, arms too thin, head tilted at an unnatural angle. My pulse hammered. The printer spit out the still ink bleeding at the edges, but clear enough. Evidence. Harder to dismiss. And yet, as I studied the photo, a new sound joined the silence, a knock, deliberate and steady, at my front door. The knock echoed 3 times before I reached the door. When I opened it, no one was there, only another envelope. Heavier this time. Slid halfway under the mat. The HOA seal was pressed deep into the flap. My hands tightened as I tore it open. Inside, alongside a formal summons for the upcoming hearing, was a smaller photocopy, my own still image of the figure from last night. The same photo I had printed and pinned to the corkboard. Across it, in bold red marker, someone had scrawled, "Fabrication." My chest tightened. Whoever delivered it had been inside my house or close enough to my window to photograph the evidence through the glass. The realization narrowed the world around me. This wasn't just rumor anymore. It was intrusion. I called the police out of instinct. But when I mentioned the HOA and strange lights, the dispatcher's tone cooled. "Civil dispute," she said flatly, promising to note the call. No cruiser arrived. I wasn't surprised. The HOA carried more weight in this neighborhood than any badge. Determined not to fold. I drove back to the county office, demanding another look at the parcel records. The clerk hesitated but eventually admitted several documents from the early '80s were pulled after errors in boundary filings, she whispered as she handed me a brittle sheet, an index showing that parcel 17B, now listed as Community Recreation Lot, had once been designated Memorial Garden. Someone had changed the designation decades ago. I left with the copy sealed in my notebook, the paper fragile under my palm. The truth wasn't complete, but it was enough to prove the HOA had something to hide. That night, I fortified the house, breaker off, camera adjusted, every entry locked, at 01:11 a.m. The glow returned, fiercer than before, spreading not just across my lawn, but pressing against every window simultaneously. The walls pulsed with white veins, trembling like breath on glass. Through the lens, the figure bent low, a hand of light dragging slowly across my child's old bedroom window upstairs, the room I hadn't entered since returning. I stumbled back, pulse hammering. It wasn't random. It was searching. In the morning, I pinned the new parcel record beside the photographs on my board. My evidence was growing, but so was the thing outside, and it had chosen its next target. The evidence board on my wall was starting to look like a war map. Notices from the HOA, photographs of the glow, and now the fragile copy of Parcel 17B, marked once as Memorial Garden. I stared at it over black coffee, the bitter taste grounding me against the rising dread. Every deployment had taught me one thing. Paper trails outlive lies. If the HOA wanted to bury the past, they had underestimated a veteran with nothing left to lose. By late morning, I drove to the county recorder's office again, this time asking for microfiche archives. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, wheeled out the machine. Grainy images rolled past deeds, boundary adjustments, plats. When I reached Oak Street, I saw gaps where entire years should have been. 1982 through 1984 missing. Litigation hold. The clerk explained again, his voice low, almost rehearsed. Old disputes tied to your HOA. But one strip remained intact, a plat survey dated June 1983. In tiny faded print, the land now housing the clubhouse was labeled Parcel 17B, Memorial Garden, Oak Ridge Baptist. The church had dissolved in 1984. No record showed what became of the plots after. I printed the film copy and slid it into my binder. Hard evidence. At last. Back home, the HOA car was already parked in front of my house. Andrew from compliance sat behind the wheel, scribbling on his clipboard. I stepped out of my truck, holding the binder against my chest. "You've been warned. Mr. Miller," he called through the open window, "the board won't tolerate fabrications. Take down your cameras, destroy whatever you've been printing." I held the parcel copy high enough for him to see. "This isn't fabrication. This is county record." His eyes flickered, the mask breaking just long enough to reveal unease. Then he started the engine and drove off without another word. That night, I arranged the microfiche copy beside the photo of the figure. Breaker off. Camera ready. At 01:11 a.m. The glow appeared as always, but this time it narrowed into a beam that traced directly across the plat survey lying open on my desk. The white streak ran over the words Memorial Garden, illuminating them until the letters looked carved in fire. The light was pointing to the past, and the past was buried under the HOA's foundations. The next morning, I carried the parcel copy straight to the HOA office. My boots echoed against the tiled floor, the sound sharp in the sterile lobby. Marjorie Clark was there again, stationed behind the front desk like a judge awaiting petitioners. She didn't bother with a greeting, only adjusted her glasses as I placed the copy down in front of her. "This is from the county archive," I said. "Parcel 17B was once a memorial garden. Your clubhouse sits on top of it." Her hand hovered over the page but didn't touch it. Her expression didn't flicker, but her silence lasted long enough to confirm I had struck something raw. "Finally!" She pushed the paper back toward me with a single manicured finger. "You misunderstand the record," she said. "Lot designations change. Churches sell property. Nothing sinister there. What is sinister? Mr. Miller is harassing this association with manufactured hysteria." I felt heat rise in my chest. "Those lights aren't hysteria. I have recordings, photographs, and this record proves the land was never cleared properly. That's why they appear. Something was left here." Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you continue down this road, you'll find yourself not only fined, but sued for defamation. The HOA has resources. You don't." The threat hung heavy in the air. I gathered the paper and left, but I knew her attempt to gaslight me only confirmed the truth. Back home, I pulled the blinds tight and set up the camera earlier than usual. By 12:30 static was already crawling across the feed. I leaned forward, watching. At 01:11, the glow erupted stronger than before, filling the yard in a solid sheet of white. Through the lens, the figure took shape taller now, arms elongated, head bowed. As I adjusted the focus, words flared across the screen in jagged distortion, as though burned into the pixels themselves. "Remember!" I jerked back, the printer spitting out stills that showed the distortion as black streaks and warped letters. The message was undeniable. Whatever haunted Oak Street wasn't random, it carried memory, a demand for recognition. I pinned the still beside the parcel copy. The glow wasn't just haunting me, it was bearing witness to something the HOA wanted erased. The weight of the evidence was beginning to eclipse the silence I'd tried to keep. My corkboard was no longer just a record. It was a timeline that pointed to deliberate erasure. The parcel map, the photographs, the distorted word burned into the video feed. Remember, each piece layered into a narrative the HOA refused to acknowledge. I decided it was time to test whether the past was anchored only to my property or if it spread across Oak Street, carrying my infrared camera. I walked after midnight toward the Clubhouse. The building loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, its floodlights bright but hollow, casting more shadow than security. The closer I drew, the more the air tightened, as if the atmosphere itself resisted me. I set the camera on a tripod near the hedge line and aimed it squarely at the clubhouse foundation. At 01:11 a.m., the glow appeared not in my yard but directly across the front steps of the building. The light stretched along the brick like veins, illuminating faint lettering beneath the paint curves and lines that looked like names. My breath caught. Someone had scraped away a dedication plaque and covered it with layers of fresh paint. Through the camera, the glow flickered harder, and the outline of a child's figure stepped across the steps, head bent, hands clasped as if in prayer. The image lingered only seconds before dissolving into static. But it was enough. The lens had captured proof beyond my lawn, beyond rumor. The land itself was bearing witness. When I returned home, I printed the frames and studied the faint lettering the glow had revealed. With a magnifier, I made out fragments, memory of the children. The rest was obscured, but I had no doubt it had once been a memorial plaque affixed to the very building the HOA celebrated as its proud centerpiece. At dawn, another notice was taped to my door, this one sharper, colder. Cease unauthorized surveillance of common property. The timing proved they were watching me as closely as I was watching them, but now I had hard evidence photographs of the erased plaque, the parcel record, and the spectral figure etched against the clubhouse steps. The HOA wasn't just negligent. They were complicit in burying history, and whatever was buried was no longer content to stay silent. By the time the HOA scheduled their night safety walk, I knew it wasn't about safety. It was about control. Flyers appeared on every door, urging residents to join board members in demonstrating the harmlessness of rumored disturbances. The tone was cheerful, almost mocking, but the subtext was clear, expose me as the paranoid veteran spreading ghost stories. I showed up anyway. I wanted witnesses. At 10 p.m., a small crowd gathered outside the clubhouse. Families came with flashlights, children clinging to their parents' arms. Marjorie stood at the front with her clipboard, smiling like a politician on election night. "We're here to remind everyone," she said, "that our community is safe, and rumors of strange lights are baseless. Tonight, you'll see for yourselves." Her gaze locked on me as she said it. The walk began. We moved in a slow procession down Oak Street, neighbors whispering, some casting quick glances in my direction. Cynthia kept close to Marjorie, her dog yapping at every shadow. I trailed near the back, camera slung around my neck, notebook in my pocket. By 1 a.m., the group was restless. Nothing had appeared. and a few residents muttered that they should have stayed in bed. Then, at 1:11 exactly, the air shifted. The familiar hum slid under my skin, and the glow erupted across my lawn. Gasps spread through the group like wildfire. The light swelled higher than ever before, stretching into a full human form visible to every eye present. It hovered in the center of my yard, arms outstretched, a thin white radiance bleeding into the grass. Children screamed. One woman dropped her flashlight, and the beam rolled wildly across the pavement. Marjorie barked for everyone to stay calm, but her voice quivered. The figure drifted forward, its glow spilling onto the sidewalk, etching the concrete with faint streaks that looked like letters. People surged backward, tripping over one another to get away. I snapped photographs in rapid succession, my hands steady despite the chaos. For once, it wasn't just me, not just my lens. An entire crowd had seen it. There would be no easy dismissal now, as the figure dissolved, leaving only the lingering hum. I turned to the crowd. Faces were pale, mouths open, eyes wide with fear. The silence that followed was heavier than any denial. They had all witnessed it, and the HOA's grip on the story had fractured. Chaos unraveled faster than Marjorie could contain it. Neighbors scattered in all directions after the apparition vanished, their flashlights bouncing wildly against the pavement. Cynthia tried to wrangle her dog, but the animal clawed against her arms, whining toward the empty air where the figure had stood. For once, her smug certainty had cracked into raw panic. I stayed planted on the sidewalk, camera still in hand. The photos I had snapped showed the glow stretched high, unmistakable, and the faint streaks across the pavement marks that looked like half-formed names. My evidence board had grown stronger overnight, but this moment meant something more. The truth was no longer mine alone. Then the scream tore through the crowd. It came from the center of the group, where Andrew from compliance had been standing. He stumbled, dropped his clipboard, and collapsed onto the curb. His body convulsed as if electricity had seized him. Eyes rolled back. Parents shielded their children, pulling them away. Several phones lifted, recording. Marjorie barked orders, "Give him space. He's fine. He's fine." But her voice shook. She crouched beside Andrew, pressing her handkerchief to his forehead as if that could erase what dozens had seen. Cynthia pulled out her phone, streaming live, her shrill commentary spilling onto the internet in real time. "This is Oak Street. Something's happening. They said it was fake, but look, I moved closer. Snapping photos. Not of Andrew's suffering, but of the way the light still lingered faintly on the concrete around him, shimmering like a brand. Through the lens, I caught a shadow bending across his body thin, childlike arms draped as though in mourning. When paramedics finally arrived, they wheeled Andrew into the ambulance, his body slack, his face pale. The crowd pressed closer, shouting questions, demanding explanations. Marjorie straightened, her expression cracking into visible fear for the first time. She raised her hands to calm the residents, but every word fell against disbelief. Phones buzzed. Cynthia announced to anyone within earshot that her live stream had already racked up hundreds of viewers. "People know now," she hissed to Marjorie. "You can't spin this." The president's eyes flicked toward me, hard and sharp, as if she knew exactly who had lit the fuse. I didn't need to say a word. The HOA's iron curtain of denial had split wide open, and the world outside Oak Street was now watching. By dawn, the neighborhood buzzed like a hornet's nest. Videos from the safety walk had spread across local forums and social media overnight. Neighbors replayed the footage in their kitchens and garages, some swearing the figure was a trick of light, others insisting it was proof of haunting. The HOA's carefully polished facade was crumbling, and Marjorie knew it. She called for an emergency board meeting that evening inside the clubhouse. Attendance was mandatory. Notices were slipped under every door, phrased like a summons rather than an invitation. I arrived early, binder under my arm, camera dangling at my side. The air inside the clubhouse was heavy with lemon polish, masking something earthier beneath, something damp. Rows of folding chairs filled the hall. Residents murmured in clusters, arguments already breaking out. Some demanded answers, others muttered about lawsuits, property values, and safety. The board members sat stiff at the front table, avoiding eye contact with one another. Marjorie stood at the podium, but her poise from the night before was gone. Her hands trembled against the wood as she called the meeting to order. When the floor opened, I rose and placed my evidence on the table, the parcel map, the photographs, the still frames of the figure across my lawn, and the latest image of names glowing faintly on the sidewalk. Gasps echoed through the room as I spread the papers wide enough for everyone to see. "This isn't rumor," I said, voice steady. "These grounds were once a memorial garden. The board knew. They built over it. And whatever was left here isn't silent anymore." Marjorie snapped the folder shut, her voice sharp, baseless. "These are fabrications designed to discredit this association. Mr. Miller is a disturbed man with an agenda." But before she could continue, the lights in the clubhouse flickered. A low hum crawled through the air, familiar and suffocating. People turned toward the windows. Outside, the glow had returned, brighter than ever, spilling across the glass like liquid fire. Several residents gasped. One woman fainted in her chair. Children wailed, and through the windows, the figure appeared head bowed, arms outstretched as if it had been listening all along. The board members scrambled to cut the power, to shut the blinds, but it was useless. Every eye in the room was fixed on the apparition. And with that moment, any hope the HOA had of denying the truth was gone. The morning after the clubhouse incident, Oak Street felt fractured down its center. Some neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering about calling priests or selling their homes. Others demanded resignations from the HOA board. For the first time since I had moved back, people approached me not with suspicion, but with questions, fear dressed up as curiosity. The board, however, doubled down. An emergency notice went out claiming the disturbance was a staged projection by an unnamed resident, a thinly veiled accusation aimed squarely at me. They scheduled another hearing, this time to consider disciplinary measures for repeated violations of community peace. But not everyone was ready to protect them. Late that afternoon, I received a quiet knock. It was Thomas Grant, one of the younger board members. He looked pale, his tie askew, a man torn between loyalty and conscience. He stepped inside quickly, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Marjorie herself to appear. "I voted no last night," he whispered. Marjorie forced the minutes to record unanimous approval. "They're burying everything, just like they buried that memorial. But if you want proof, you need to see the basement of the clubhouse. There's a locked door below the meeting hall. Marjorie keeps the only key." I pressed him. "What's down there?" He shook his head. "I don't know. But I've seen contractors carry paint and plywood through that door after hours. They were told to patch a wall no one was supposed to notice." The words sank deep. My gut told me the plaque I had glimpsed under the glow wasn't the only thing hidden there. That night, the HOA met again, this time behind closed doors. I stationed myself outside with my camera, the lens aimed at the lower windows of the clubhouse. At 01:11 a.m., the glow erupted exactly where Thomas had said the basement level, through the grainy feed. I caught the outline of the figure pressing against the glass from inside. Its faint white arms splayed across the pane as if begging to be let out. The image froze me in place. It wasn't wandering anymore. It was contained. By dawn, I had already decided. The basement held the truth, and I was going to open that door, with or without Marjorie's blessing. I didn't have to wait long for a chance. 2 days later, the fire marshal arrived at the clubhouse for a routine inspection summoned. I suspected, by residents filing anonymous safety complaints after the meeting fiasco, I saw him unlock the side door with a master key, his clipboard tucked under one arm. I followed at a distance, binder in hand, and when Thomas Grant spotted me hovering by the steps, he gave the smallest nod. Permission enough. Inside, the air was cooler, damp. The scent of paint and chemicals hung beneath the surface polish. The fire marshal checked exit signs and extinguishers while I lingered near the stairwell. Thomas slipped me a spare flashlight and gestured downward. 15 minutes, he muttered, before Marjorie shows. The basement was narrower than I remembered from childhood tours of the clubhouse. Concrete walls ran close on either side, patched unevenly, as if renovations had been rushed. I moved slowly, the flashlight beam bouncing across stacked chairs and storage bins. Then I found the wall. Fresh paint, brighter than the rest, stretched across a rectangle the size of a door. The surface looked sealed, but the brush strokes hadn't fully concealed what lay beneath. I raised the light, and faint impressions surfaced curves of letters, half buried in white. I scraped gently with the edge of my pocket knife. A fleck of paint flaked away, revealing bronze. I pressed harder. More letters emerged. In memory of the children. My throat tightened. This was the plaque the glow had revealed outside, entombed here, deliberately hidden. The HOA hadn't just built over a memorial, they had entombed the memory under layers of denial. Behind me. The air shifted. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. A cold current pressed against my back, and when I turned, the glow was there, spilling along the wall, seeping through the paint until the plaque shone like fire under water. The outline of the child appeared again, hands pressed against the bronze as though reaching for release. I stumbled backward, camera snapping frame after frame. My breath clouded in the air, each exhale visible in the freezing cold that hadn't been there seconds before. Then footsteps clattered above. Marjorie's voice barked down the stairwell, sharp with fury. No one is authorized down there. The glow pulsed brighter, almost defiant. I snapped one final photo as Thomas rushed me toward the stairs. The image of that bronze plaque, lit by the impossible, would never leave me. Neither would the realization that the HOA wasn't just negligent, it was guilty. Marjorie's heels struck the basement steps like a judge's gavel. Thomas and I barely cleared the stairwell before she appeared, her blazer buttoned tight, eyes flashing with fury. "You've overstepped. Mr. Miller," she hissed. "This is trespassing, and you'll answer for it." I lifted the camera, showing her the live image of the plaque glowing through fresh paint. "Answer for this," I said. "You buried a memorial under your clubhouse. You lied in your reports. You falsified records. And now the dead themselves are demanding to be remembered." Her face drained of color, just for a breath, before hardening again. "Fabrications. All of it." She spun toward Thomas. "And your seat on the board is finished." Thomas didn't flinch. "Better finished than complicit," he muttered. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "The county archives have the parcel map. The microfiche shows the original designation. I've preserved every photo with timestamps, mirrored the files online, and sent copies to 3 residents. You can't erase this anymore?" For the first time. Her confidence faltered. Her hands trembled, and her eyes darted toward the sealed wall behind me, as if she half expected it to burst open. In that hesitation, she spoke words she must have regretted the second they left her mouth. We were told it was cheaper to cover it than to move them. The sentence sliced the air in two. Thomas stiffened. My chest locked. Cheaper to cover it them. I snapped another photo of her expression as she realized she had confessed. The glow behind the wall surged brighter, leaking around the edges of paint and plaster, illuminating the basement in a pale storm of white. Residents upstairs shouted as the light seeped through cracks in the floorboards, spilling into the meeting hall. Marjorie backed toward the stairs, clutching the rail. "This community will not survive scandal," she whispered, almost to herself. But the scandal was no longer avoidable. The truth was burning its way out of the dark. The fallout came quickly. By morning, Thomas had delivered copies of the photos and Marjorie's slip of confession to the county sheriff's office. Within 48 hours, investigators arrived at the clubhouse with warrants. They cordoned off the basement, pried away the plastered wall, and exposed the bronze plaque in full. In memory of the children of Oak Ridge Baptist. The lettering, once hidden, gleamed under flashlight beams. News crews descended on Oak Street before noon. Vans lined the curb, their dishes pointed skyward, reporters jostling for quotes. For decades, the HOA had presented itself as the model of order and prosperity. Now its president was filmed being escorted into a patrol car, lips pressed into a tight line as neighbors shouted questions. The charges were civil and criminal falsification of community reports, obstruction of record disclosure, and conspiracy to conceal a burial designation. Financial mismanagement surfaced 2 diverted maintenance fees that had padded board members' accounts under a line item called Pet Control Services. The paper trail, once buried, was unspooling. I watched from my porch as the sheriff's deputies carried out boxes of files. The glow did not appear that night, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the sound itself. Residents trickled to my door with apologies, some offering food, others only their shame. Even Cynthia, eyes red, admitted her live stream had gone viral and could no longer be spun away. For the first time since I moved back, the balance had shifted. The HOA's power, the clipboards, the fines, the intimidation had collapsed under the weight of truth. Justice wasn't finished, but it had finally arrived. And yet, as I taped the sheriff's receipt of evidence to my board, I knew the story wasn't over. The plaque was uncovered, but the presence that had burned its memory into our nights had not been laid to rest. Its demand had been clear from the beginning. Recognition was only the first step. The days that followed felt like living inside a wound that refused to close. With the plaque uncovered, the county ordered a full excavation around the clubhouse. Heavy machinery clawed into the soil while deputies stood guard, and neighbors gathered at the tape line, whispering as each scoop of earth exposed what the HOA had hidden for decades. By the 3rd day, they found them, small wooden markers, rotted but intact, and beneath them, shallow remains wrapped in faded cloth. The workers stopped immediately. The sheriff's office announced that the area would be treated as both a historical site and a crime scene. Reporters called it the buried heart of Oak Street. The discovery ignited the community. Some residents demanded relocation of the clubhouse. Others spoke of lawsuits against the board. Families who had lived here for generations wept openly, wondering if forgotten kin lay beneath the soil. Marjorie, now out on bail, became the focus of every camera lens, her face hollow and guarded. She offered no comment. At night, the glow returned. It did not haunt the lawns or hover aimlessly. It appeared directly over the excavation pit, illuminating the site with a steady, mournful brilliance. The figure formed again, smaller this time, fragile, as if it had given shape to one of the children whose names were lost. It bowed once toward the crowd that had gathered at the barricade, then dissolved into the soil. I stood among my neighbors, camera lowered, No one mocked, no one denied. For the first time, the apparition had an audience that received it with silence, not disbelief. The next day, a temporary memorial was erected on the site. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes covered the chain-link fence. I pinned my own photograph, the still frame of the word "Remember" etched in static between two bouquets. It fluttered in the evening breeze like a banner. Justice was unfolding, piece by piece. But the glow's presence reminded us it wasn't yet finished. The truth had been unearthed, but peace was something else entirely. With the plaque exposed and the remains transferred into state custody, Oak Street tried to steady itself. The HOA was dissolved under emergency order, its accounts frozen, its board members subpoenaed. Neighbors who once whispered about my supposed equipment now crossed the street to shake my hand. Some thanked me for persistence, others only muttered apologies, ashamed of the silence they had kept for so long. But normal never returned. On the final night before the county sealed the clubhouse and fenced it off, I sat on my porch with the notebook that had followed me through every sleepless hour. The street was quiet, stripped of its usual hum of sprinklers and late television glow. At 01:11 a.m., the light appeared again, not across the lawn, not in the clubhouse windows, but at the gate of my own house. It rose slowly, brighter than I had ever seen, coalescing into a figure that stood upright, motionless, watching. Not a blur this time, not distortion, but presence solemn and unyielding. My heart pounded as I set down the notebook and stepped to the edge of the porch. The figure didn't advance. It only lifted one hand, palm outward, as if sealing something between us. A vow, a warning, or both. The glow lingered there for minutes that felt like hours, painting the street in silver. Behind closed curtains, I saw neighbors' shadows gathering, peeking out, bearing witness to the final echo. When the light finally receded, it left no scorch marks, no residue, only silence so complete it rang in my ears. I knew then that justice in the legal sense had been served. But the deeper justice the memory owed to the children whose names had been scraped from bronze would demand vigilance long after the trials ended. I closed the notebook for the last time and set it on the shelf beside my father's folded flag. Oak Street might rebuild, but it would never forget, and neither would I.